Greetings, brothers and sisters. I am the Treetop Flyer. We are the Altai Band. And today we're going to bring to you the second in our series of Living Permaculture. Our Living Permaculture series is designed to follow up a documentary we began earlier in the year on Agenda 21. The idea is to give you living permaculture solutions to a forced, contrived, artificial sustainability under agendas such as Agenda 21. So we've chosen a very special day and a very special time to do this segment of the Living Permaculture series. Today is the Solstice Day. The Solstice Day being the longest day of daylight hours of the year. The Solstice Day and night traditionally were always celebrated with wonderful ceremonies, wonderful celebrations, wonderful and powerful rituals that had everything to do with the real sustainability of ancient cultures and ancient people and their ways of agriculture, their ways of preserving themselves in many different environments all over this wonderful planet. The solstice day, being the longest day of daylight hours with the life-giving rays of the sun, without which there would be no life, of course that's going to be celebrated by people who had a living connection with all of the essential five elements. They weren't fragmented. They had a living relationship and connection to all of them. So the sun, the flowing waters, the moon, the stars, all the plants, all the animals, what they called all their relations. They weren't something separate from them, they were all their relations. All of this was celebrated in the solstice rituals and celebrations, including fertility rites. Fertility rites not only for their agriculture and their hunting and their gathering, but for human fertility rites and celebration, which of course, how wonderful that is. We have to have the celebration of birth and life for our species as well. So we start on the solstice day. We're going to bring you a great variety of principles associated with permaculture, self-sufficient living, homesteading, gardening, a way for you to learn how to recreate that kind of connection with nature in your life now and live it as a chosen lifestyle. So we've picked the backdrop of the living forest, which in permaculture understanding is your outer perimeter zone. Ideally, it's the area that you leave as untouched as possible. You can use it to get many different kinds of foodstuffs and medicinal plants. And of course, it's filled with all the species of wild animals and insects and birds and everything. It's a living forest, providing you with all the materials you need for food, clothing, and shelter, and the living waters and sunlight and wind and earth and metal, all the elements that are essential for life. And that's why the solstice celebrations were sacred celebrations of life and the sustainability of life. So here we are. You can hear the delightful music, hopefully well. You can hear the flowing, absolutely sparkling, clean, drinkable, flowing, living, live water. And this is the kind of water you want to utilize if you're fortunate enough to have a place where that can be done. This kind of water is constantly purifying, regenerating, oxygenating, flowing, filling itself with chi, and that's why it's pure. That's why it's still cold. That's why it's drinkable and provides the essential life for all your agricultural needs as well as your consumption needs. But this water is also much more highly energetically charged as it flows over the rocks, as it twists and turns coming down the mountain, as it stays in the shade of a mature canopy of forest. This is what preserves water in its highest energetic state and its purity. If you cut these forests, as they still unfortunately insist on doing today with clear-cut forestry practices, the springs that feed these streams and creeks and rivers will dry up. And the sun will come through and bake the plants that are in the understory of the forest, and many of them will die because they need that shade and semi-shade. They need the cooler temperature. So it's a very unwise practice to clear-cut the forest. Earlier, a couple years ago, I made a documentary about that too, where I showed all the unwise, unsustainable practices of clear-cut forestry and monocrop agriculture, of replanting a single species just for the commercial interest. That's not the kind of living relationship you want in permaculture. So here we have a mature second growth forest with some old growth trees that were left from the early logging days. We're here in the coastal rainforest, very wet, lush environment of the Pacific Northwest. Marvelous place to live and to visit and to practice permaculture and a sustainable lifestyle. Obviously, it's a very lush, green, high rainfall environment here on the coastal range. So when we show you the agriculture that is being done in this area, sustainable agriculture, organic, biodynamic, sustainable agriculture, it's all been pulled off in a very cool, wet environment, which is a bit challenging, but we've shown many of these folks how to do this. And everything we're going to show over the next few days are projects that, as a permaculture consultant and designer, I've either consulted with these people or been a designer or actually done the installations and or the work in some cases to put these things in. So it's actually something we've taught them how to live and experience, and we live it and experience it as well. So here in this backdrop is where we'll begin with the living forest and the living waters. And please enjoy and celebrate your solstice day and night.
We start this permaculture video with the element of water. Sacred, flowing, living water, without which there would be no life. And here you see a beautiful, reverential celebration of living, flowing water. Less than 1% of the water on this planet is potable, pure, fresh water. And we waste it, and we still proceed to wash all our toxins and our waste products and our pollutants into it and away with it, and think there will be no consequence. That shows a profound disrespect for this living element, as well as a complete misunderstanding of it. All water is connected to all other water. For all you techies out there, it's the ultimate informational transference element. It's the ultimate supercomputer. The frequencies and the information contained in water is shared with all other water. So imagine what happens when you pollute, severely pollute water in any one place. I would highly suggest everybody read and study of the work of the great genius of living water, Victor Schauberger, and his contributions to science, engineering, and the understanding of natural systems. Go on a hot summer day in a hot, dry place in the sun and contemplate what it would be like if we continue destroying the lush green living places and freshwater places around the world. Obviously, it would be catastrophic. One of the unique features of this planet is that it's a water planet, and no life is possible without water. Now we're searching throughout space, searching for other places that may have water that can sustain life. Well, what's the point of that if we're going to go there and destroy the water the same way we are destroying the water on this planet? Doesn't seem like a very intelligent or sustainable thing, does it? When you have this kind of reverence for water, as you're seeing here, you'll live a very different kind of lifestyle. So we start with the living element of water and a living forest surrounding it. So now we move, continuing to another location and still focusing on the element of water. Here we have a freshwater pond. A marvelous source of myriad forms of life. We always highly advise people to have a freshwater pond as a part of their permaculture design and plan, if possible. It not only is an excellent way to store water for many, many uses, but it's a marvelous focal point and center for many, many life forms. We'll try to zoom in here and see if you can see. This pond is filled with many frogs and polywogs in their stages of development to becoming frogs. These folks have told us that hundreds of frogs have hatched out of this pond. Now that's really, really important because amphibians are disappearing and becoming extinct all over the world. That is an indicator species, or an indicator that something is very, very seriously wrong in the environment. The ancestors of our modern frogs have been living on this planet for 200 million years. What is happening now that suddenly they are disappearing? And in a dramatically rapid fashion. Do you really think that won't affect the entire web of life and us as well very, very rapidly? So we always encourage freshwater ponds as a part of a permaculture and a sustainable program on a piece of land. Now you can take the algae-rich water of a freshwater pond like this, filled with the nutrients of fish. By all means, put fish in it. The nutrients from the fish, the nutrients from the frogs, and blue-green algae will begin to form in this water. If you then take some of that water and put it in a barrel and put it in a bucket or put it in a container of some sort and throw a little nitrogen-rich manure in it, like chicken manure or elk manure or deer manure, and some of your own urine. Urine is 21% nitrogen. Wonderful nutrient for growing your foodstuffs. Save it, use it. If you put that in the water, you'll have a constantly regenerating blue-green algae-rich manure tea nutrient solution to water your plants and your foodstuffs with. And that is an excellent thing to do, and they will respond very, very nicely. So a pond, still water, fresh water, clean. It needs an outflow. It needs a good inflow and a good outflow. Aerated if you're going to keep fish in it. And eventually these folks are going to raise some fish in this pond. But right now it's an incredible environment filled. I've never seen so many frogs in a little pond. So there's a freshwater counterpart to our living water.
Now we're going to talk about the earth element in permaculture. Soil, earth, the very heart and soul of organic gardening, farming, biodynamic gardening and farming, and permaculture. The permaculture intention in growing foodstuffs is to grow as much high quality food in all its varieties and types as possible with the least amount of outside input so that it's sustainable with the least amount of work possible. Doesn't mean you won't have to do any work, because you will, but without too much excess or extensive labor, because it's a system that works harmoniously and sustainably together when the principles are applied. So composting, working with soil building and soil making, literally at times, is the heart and soul of all these sustainable types of farming and gardening. Composting, the fine art and science, and it is a fine art and science, is essentially taking all types of organic matter and materials, any organic matter and materials, and allowing the natural bacterias, yeasts, and molds, organisms, microorganisms, to break them down into organic matter and elements so that plants can absorb those elements and flourish and grow. Nature is one gigantic composting system. If you stand still too long, it will start to compost you. It's essentially trying to turn everything into soil all the time. That's what the living envelope of organic growth is doing. It's breaking down mountains, it's breaking down rocks, it's breaking down all organic and inorganic matter, in turning it into this wonderful living layer of soil, topsoil, without which you cannot grow any food. So the fine art of composting has many different methods and many different types of structure or containers in which to do it. But basically, you're putting organic materials in and allowing nature to break them down, but you're speeding up the process, and you're mixing your high carbon type organic matter with organic matter that breaks down quickly, and then organic matter that breaks down a little more slowly, and then organic matter that gives you a very high carbon ratio and breaks down slowly over a period of time. If you only have the very high carbon, difficult to break down type organic matter, your compost will take a very long period of time to be ready. If you go with the green, high nitrogen, very quickly decomposing matter, it kind of turns into a slimy mess that doesn't give you a very full, rounded type compost. So there's many ways to achieve that. So we're going to start talking about, this is a tumbling drum that's placed so that you can tumble it. The idea being, with proper air, you've got to have those 5 elements always, with proper air, heat and temperature, a little bit of moisture, and the tumbling movement, it allows the matter to break down as quickly as possible. So this is just a basic compost tumbler that can be purchased. You can make them yourself as well out of drums, plastic barrels and drums, or any way that you're able to achieve it. So it has a hand crank that allows you to rotate it and turn the compost over, because if you can turn it, it's going to become ready much more quickly. If you don't have a method to tumble it and turn it, then you either have to hand dig it or use some other way to rotate the compost. The stuff on the bottom will begin breaking down the most rapidly, and so if you can move that to the top and take the stuff that's in the middle and the top and turn it to the bottom, this is the fastest way to achieve compost. Now, here we are in a new location in the Pacific Northwest, still in the coastal range, a very wet, cool, moist rainforest type area. It can be difficult to get the compost ready quickly because it stays cool and wet. So when the microorganisms begin to break down the organic matter, they create heat. The more nitrogen you can put in there with chicken manure, urine, other types of manure that have a higher nitrogen content, the nitrogen will accelerate the composting process and make it done more quickly. You don't want it to go too quick, and you don't want it to take too long. You're after a nice middle ground there. So this is a tumbling method. We're going to pause in a moment and show you some other methods, but you can get very, very sophisticated about doing this. And we're going to show later some ways of doing that, what I call true biodynamic composting, by putting certain things in there that complete all the elements and nutrients you need or enhance the speed at which the composting process will take place. I've always advised a very robust and vigorous composting operation and plan, whether you're doing just a little backyard container gardening or you're doing a very large, even a commercial organic or biodynamic type garden. Composting is the heart and soul of it. And there's readily available organic materials just about everywhere. And you can use everything. And we'll show later how you can harvest your own foliage and grass and hay and leaves, all your deciduous leaves that fall down from the trees in the fall. Any organic matter can be composted, including human manures. And this has been done all over the world for thousands of years. There's nothing wrong with it. I wouldn't advise that you do that in a city environment where pathogenic type organisms could be more prevalent. But if you're on your own homestead or you're in your own very healthy permaculture sustainable kind of environment, there's nothing wrong with using your own human manure and composting it, as well as animal manures from any of the agricultural animals you may have. And chicken manure is a wonderful high nitrogen source of nutrients for the garden. You have to be careful with it. It has to be ready. It has to be completely decomposed and turned into a finished type compost. But some animal manures are ready immediately, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. Rabbit manure is fabulous. Elk and deer manure is fabulous. Sheep and alpacas and llamas and some of those animals, you can use their manure more quickly. It doesn't take as long to break down as chicken manure, which is very high in nitrogen content, and you don't want to poison the plants with too high a nitrogen in the beginning. It has to be broken down and made available for the plants in the proper way. So this is a tumbling compost type system, and you just feed the different types of material into the compost tumbler. Give it a little bit of moisture. I always advocate that you add some living forest soil. You go out to the forest and you find that top layer, inch or two or however deep it is, of decomposing living forest soil, because every teaspoon of that is filled with literally millions and millions of microorganisms that break down the organic matter in the forest and make it available for the trees. Look, a forest is one gigantic composting system. Look at the size of these trees. Why should you struggle to grow a small little broccoli or a cabbage or a corn plant or anything that is a foodstuff for you? Look what the forest does on its own when it's in balance and all its systems are allowed to function properly without being interrupted or harmed by man's activities. It's one magnificent composting system. Many types of insects and animals contribute to the composting system within the forest, and you should do the same. So I advocate putting a little bit of forest soil or a little finished garden soil in with your compost to kick it off, and throw in some composting worms, which we'll get to in a minute and talk about that in detail, some composting worms or some earthworms, and get them in there helping to speed up the process, because that's their job, is to eat and digest organic matter and turn it into nutrients that are completely balanced and wonderful for your garden. So add those in and throw in a little of your own urine or animal urine or bedding from your agricultural animals that has the urine in it, and that high nitrogen will kick off the composting and get it heating up and make it happen a little more rapidly. So that's a compost tumbler. That's how it works. And now we're going to show how you begin from your very kitchen and how you can take all your organic scrap foodstuffs and start even in your kitchen. I don't care if you live in an apartment in the city, If you have a place to grow some foodstuffs, by all means start. If you live in the suburbs and you have a little more space or a yard, dig it up and grow food, please. You're going to need it. And why not do it anyway? It's much more sustainable than having to buy food that comes from far away places and huge amounts of petroleum fuel as necessary to truck it in from far away. And those places, by the way, are failing. If you see Southern California and South Florida and the southern regions of America, they're in a very, very serious long-term drought, which is really affecting the agriculture in those areas. And essentially those areas are desertifying in some cases. And so it's going to really affect the availability and the price of foodstuffs. So start growing your own, whether it's on the smallest of scale or to a large scale. I could not recommend it enough. So I'm going to move away from the camera here, and we'll show you how it starts with a basic composting bucket that's in your kitchen, and you begin the process of making compost, which will give you delicious food in an ongoing, sustainable fashion. So what you see here is a special composting, kitchen composting bucket. It's special because the recycled type plastic it's made out of is impregnated with EM. And EM stands for effective microbes, and that's actually embedded in the plastic, but it gives it those microbes off into whatever organic type material you put in there and begin the composting process. So it speeds it up and makes this wonderful liquid kind of slurry that will make the compost go much more quickly, and then those bioorganisms will already be in the compost to help turn any other matter with which it is added to become compost more quickly. So that's effects called EM, effective microbes. I cannot talk about this wonderful stuff enough. There's a wonderful lady in Thurston County named Erica who handles this product, and you can get some of it and start using it to enhance the fertility of your land and your gardening and your farming in an incredible way. It also is a wonderful bioremediation type product which will clean up all kinds of toxic materials and pollutants from the soil. It's used all over the world. So effective microbes, EM for short. I use it for everything. It's a foliar feed for your plants when they grow. It conditions the soil and enhances the fertility. You use it to speed up the composting process. It's fabulous stuff, and it's very easy. You can make it yourself once you get the starter and spray it everywhere. It really makes a difference. We always advocate that in our permaculture type plans. So start with a basic bucket in your kitchen, and you can feed that to animals, your animals that you raise also, or you can simply compost all those types of materials and build your soil. It's all about feeding the soil. Feed the soil, feed the soil, feed the soil. You don't feed the plants, you feed the soil, and then the plants will take care of themselves. So that's what composting is all about. So we're going to pause now and go to another location and show you some other aspects of vermiculture, which is worm composting, and other composting type apparatuses and systems. Okay. Okay, now we're at a new location here, and you can see a basic 2-bin composting type system. And it's as simple as salvaging some recycled pallets, wood pallets that are available free everywhere, and fastening them together into 2 separate bins.
or as many as you would like. The idea is you start the composting process on one end with the rougher, coarser materials, and as they begin to break down, you can turn them and flip them into the next bin, adjacent bin, and keep moving them, and you get to the other side, and now you have finished, ready-to-use compost. If you enhance it with bioorganisms that help it break down quickly, like EM and other available organisms, and animal manures that are high in nitrogen, and worm castings, and add the composting worms in as well, you can speed this stuff up very dramatically. I've had compost that I've made in as quickly as a month, and sometimes it can take up to 80-90 days, sometimes 6 months. If you just let it go on its own and you don't turn it, or you don't give it much care, or you haven't layered your types of materials in there well or added for a soil, it can take longer. You have to watch that the compost doesn't get too wet or too dry. Again, you want to kind of right in the middle there. So here you see a 2-bin system where the composting materials have already been taken out, finished, and applied to garden beds. Now, a little bit of material has been left over here in the right-hand bin to be a continuing sustainable supply of composting worms to add into other compost piles that are being made, to feed chickens, guineas, and turkeys that are being raised, and to add them into your other garden beds so they'll begin to reproduce and enhance the fertility of those beds. Worm castings is the perfect fertilizer. Nature has created this marvelous creature in the earthworm or the composting worm, and its sole function in life is to create fertile material for you to grow foodstuffs. I highly advise you get into that, and we'll show you some other ways that you can create specific type of composting bins and composting apparatuses simply for raising worms for composting. Now you'll notice over here on the left, the majority of the finished compost was taken out and applied into beds for growing, but you leave a little down in the bottom to simply utilize all available space. The reason being is because over the years I've seen little scraps of potatoes thrown into the compost heap suddenly become the biggest, most gigantic, delicious potatoes you've ever had, and you weren't even intending to grow them there. They were scraps that threw into the heap and were volunteers and grew on their own. It's amazing how volunteers will do that in gardening. They do better than the ones you sometimes fuss over and make all this effort. So I wanted to show there where these folks are growing potatoes now, even in the remnant of the finished compost on the left-hand side. Now we're going to go close up and look at the worms here, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see them. And a whole shovel full. I don't get more. You can't see them there. Get more. Go deeper. Okay, now hold it. I'm going to zoom in. You can see that finished compost is simply crawling and solid. Break it up with your hands a little bit and show. It's absolutely filled. It's absolutely filled and crawling with composting worms. That's the idea. So they're now available to add to other beds or to feed other farm animals that love to eat them. Okay. So that's vermiculture, the intentional raising of composting and earthworms. So there you have that. Between vermiculture and raising composting worms and all the different methods of composting, again, this is the heart and soul of building fertility for organic, biodynamic, and permaculture type agriculture. Many, many places that we help people with and advise and even do some installations have no native fertile or good growing soil whatsoever. So sometimes it's a matter of creating beds and completely filling up the soil that you will be growing in, because there was nothing there to begin with that was really going to work well. Okay, so we're going to pause and go to another location and show you some additional earthworm and composting worm type. Okay, what you have here is a salvaged, recycled plastic 55-gallon barrel drum with holes drilled in the bottom and air holes drilled in the sides to allow for breathing air, that is layered and filled with organic matter and animal manure and organic scraps from the kitchen and organic matter from the foliage growing all around here, and layered together, and piles seeded with composting worms are placed in the bottom of this, and they work their way up through these materials and turn them into wonderful composting worm castings that you then can make manure teas and sprays to feed the soil and or the plants, or take the castings and work them directly into the soil for really wonderful fertility. So the ultimate, fastest, most efficient, amazing composting system in the world, though, is right there. That lovely little creature, Rhode Island red hen, chickens, people. There's the fastest, most wonderful composting system in the world. In 24 hours, they'll take your kitchen scraps that you don't want, and organic matter, and worms, and insects, and all kinds of things, and turn it into fabulous, very high nitrogen-rich compost. Okay. That's a system that I highly encourage everybody to begin to raise. They're delightful creatures. They will provide eggs and meat and feathers. People use the feathers. And of course, they're also at the heart and soul of any self-sufficient, composting, sustainable permaculture type gardening, because nitrogen starvation is a very serious problem in soils. Several times in European history in the last 1,000 years, huge numbers of people have starved to death simply because the soils were starved for nitrogen. So chicken manure is the way to go. We do it. We advise everybody to do it. And that's that. So now we'll pause again and show you another type of true. Okay, to kind of wrap up our composting part here, the earth element, soil, building fine, sustainable soil. This is a real biodynamically prepared compost. And it's layered up out of layers of forest soil, scraped off the top living part of the topsoil in the forest. The bedding and manure-rich matter from chicken coops with the chicken manure in it, the high nitrogen chicken manure, plus the grass and straw that was bedding in the chicken coops and chicken yard. Green, excess green foliage that's been cut around, and special biodynamic preparations that I showed these people how to make. We're going to demonstrate that in a little bit. But essentially what it's doing, it's called the Biodynamic 500. And I'm using elk manure instead of the cow manure. But the elk manure is prepared in a special way
and mixed into a barrel of water, and we'll demonstrate that, and then is stirred in vortexes in opposite directions, and we'll demonstrate how that's done. And those microorganisms proliferate in the water and add in a little bit of urine to add nitrogen to kick it off, and it becomes filled with millions of microorganisms that you then spray onto the compost pile or pour right in the middle, and you let those organisms proliferate and radiate out into the compost pile. Now, the various biodynamic associations have their biodynamic preparations that you can obtain, but you can also learn to make them all yourself. And the biodynamic type gardening systems they come from Rudolf Steiner, who created this, or remembered and recreated this information. But really what it is it's ancient fertility methods that go way, way back to people far beyond modern Europe. Some of it goes all the way back to ancient British Isles people and Druids and ancient farmers throughout Europe, and the ways that they had sustainable fertility before they were forced into a type of peasant enslavement that didn't always utilize the best kinds of agricultural practices. So biodynamic preparations are marvelous. They truly do work. They're quite mystical and get a little challenging to prepare. We're going to show another one a little later where you take stinging nettles, yellow dock, comfrey, horsetail, and dandelion greens and soak them in a barrel of water and let them ferment. And then you take that nutrient-rich solution and spray it out onto the soil and the plants as well. That's another biodynamic preparation. I've learned to make them all myself, and I teach people how to make them myself. You can cut a few corners, and you don't have to do everything exactly the way it was originally delivered. It's kind of complex and very esoteric, but you can still make the basic ones yourself, and it will really make a difference in your gardening and farming and your agriculture. So here's one, and you can start to see the layers down at the very bottom. It's beginning to turn into some pretty nice workable stuff. But this is a brand new pile that's just been created this spring, and it's going to take a while for it, but it's working its way down. It was quite tall, and as it works itself into finished compost, it collapses and gets lower and lower and lower, and you can keep adding material and all that. Since this one has a lot of chicken manure, it'll go quickly because of the high nitrogen. So there's a true biodynamic compost pile, again made out of simple recycled pallets and recycled salvaged chicken wire. When it gets to into permaculture, reusing, recycling, and salvaging all the materials and all the stuff is an essential part of it, because you want to be able to do it with the least amount of financial input and input of materials and resources from other places. That's at the heart of what makes it sustainable. So let me just say, modern, industrial, petrochemically oriented, factory, industrial scale farming is absolutely destructive. It is absolutely destroying the soil. It is acidifying the oceans. The introduction of GMOs is you're tinkering with the basic biology of thousands and thousands and thousands of years of human genetic foodstuffs that have been saved and the seeds that have been saved. It is a nightmare. It is unwise practice, and it is unsustainable, and it's already proving itself to be that way. So again, we will make the choice to shift to true sustainable and wise practices and relationship with living with all species, or a very mean-spirited, ruthless, tyrannical agenda is going to be forced upon us. And so that's actually what we're facing, and it's much wiser to choose to do it and change your lifestyle and the way you grow your food and live with all the living systems around you. So now we'll pause and move to another location.
Okay, now we're going to explore the fire element. Sun, heat, fire. As we explore infrastructure for permaculture and beds, types of containers to grow in, and environments specifically suited for various types of plants. So here we have a greenhouse, a sun space, a hothouse, whatever you'd like to call it. This greenhouse I built for these folks for less than $100 in materials cost because they had salvaged all the glass from some commercial greenhouses, old ones that were torn down, and they had the wood. So all that was necessary to get was screws and fasteners, and then of course labor. It's a 200 square foot greenhouse that is my design, and it's working very nicely. Let's give you a quick tour of it. 2 beds, front and back, different heights, made of salvaged pallets for free and thrown away recycled carpeting. Not bad, huh? Works very good, won't rot, and it's free. And you see all kinds of communities of plants in here. There's eggplants, there's stevia, let's see, there's tomatoes, there's peppers of various sorts. I see some squash, a strawberry, looks like some melons, a number of different types of tomatoes. And you see also what you have up here in the very high part of the greenhouse is drying racks. This you can use for drying wild-crafted foodstuffs like nettles, horsetail, teas, herbal teas of all sorts, stevia, lumber, medicinal herbs, all sorts of wild crafting. You can dry it here without electricity. So you don't even need to have electricity to utilize this greenhouse for drying, because it gets quite hot up in the top because it's really glass, it's not plastic. Alright, so you've got vents in the top, you've got rear and front access doors that can be opened so that it stays cool enough. One of the major difficulties with greenhouses is they get very hot, too hot. Okay, we'll go look at another location and see a different kind. Okay, here's another type of greenhouse, a hexagon dome greenhouse with plastic glazing and covering. This is a manufactured one. These folks bought this one. But let's take a tour inside and see what's happening. 90-degree temperature up in the top here. Again, every type of container can be used properly in a permaculture fashion to grow your plants. From 5-gallon plastic buckets to larger 55-gallon buckets to regular nursery and greenhouse type. You'll see all kinds of little plants being started for future planting here. These folks, I showed these folks how to start all their own plants in a greenhouse and thereby not have to spend money to buy commercially grown greenhouse plants to start all their own vegetables, which saves a huge amount of money and gets you into cool things like seed saving and heirloom seeds, open pollinated seeds, which I highly advise. The seed stock of this entire planet is being dominated and controlled by a handful of companies who want to do so for their own profit. Hybridize them all or turn them into GMOs by taking elements from some of them and completely control the food production on this planet. Not a good idea at all. And just why did they take every known medicinal plant and food plant on this planet and store it in a vault up there in the far north, a super cold vault? They call it the Doomsday Sea